Hey, today's SteynPost comes by way of request, really. Bethan Nodwell up in Canada asked if I would do a SteynPost on what happened in Manchester. I wrote about it and I've given various interviews on it, and I wanted to leave it a few days just to clarify my thoughts on it. I think something wicked is going on with our reaction to these appalling events. Something deadening is going on. A little bit of the West withers and dies with each one of these events and the now traditional commemoration of them. And I think the commemoration, the formula of the commemoration started after the Charlie Hebdo slaughter in Paris, when those cartoonists and other members of the editorial staff were all gunned down by these men who'd been threatening to kill them for a long time one morning at the office. And the commemorations of the dead were universal and deeply dishonest. If you like, the state appropriated their murder for the state's own purposes. Everybody was going around saying, "Je suis Charlie." Everybody was waving pencils. Nobody actually showed the things they died for. The Muhammad cartoons, the right to make cartoons about Muhammad as one does about Jesus or any other religious figure. And if they had, then the various participants in the Great World Leaders March a couple of days after their death, you'll recall that President Erdogan of Turkey and President Abbas of Palestine, the Palestinian Authority, were there, noted crusaders for free speech. Do you think they'd have been so happy to join in the commemorations if anybody had had the courage to actually hold up, say, the front cover of one of Charlie Hebdo's more provocative editions? And that really established the way we now commemorate these events. Less politically charged murders were greeted by that rather tiresome fellow who drags along his piano and plays Imagine. Imagine there's no countries. It's easy if you try. Keep this up and there won't be. It makes a lot of sense, actually. He seems to have vanished from the commemorations in Manchester. But at heart, what is going on when we say Je suis Charlie, Je suis Paris, Je suis Brussels, or Boston strong and now Manchester strong, is a kind of deflection. And I think it's a conscious deflection by the authorities. They want us to mourn the dead, but they do not want us ever to think about how we might go about avenging the dead. And that, as I say, is what gets to the deep dishonesty in some of these commemorations. I had a lot of emails from people in Manchester. I don't know a lot of people in Manchester, but I got a lot of emails from there in the last few days. This guy goes, "Dear Mark, I'd like to thank you for publishing your recent article, Dangerous Woman Meets Dangerous Man. I'm 30 years old and was born, raised and live in Manchester. Fortunately, my family and friends were not injured during the attack. I can only begin to describe the atmosphere here since Monday. Armed police patrol every corner. People hurriedly rushing to and from work while checking their news feeds to learn that streets are being closed off and that bomb disposal units are being deployed. Watching all of this take place in your home is simply head-spinning. Every unexpected call I receive from my girlfriend immediately makes me think, has something happened? Every loud noise from one of Manchester's many construction sites sets us on edge. The girls at my office are flat, drained and close to tears. Worst of all are the faces of Manchester's men, pale, tight-lipped and red-eyed. We're all having trouble sleeping and keep staring blankly into space. I know what they're all feeling, a bubbling acidic, seething rage and sense of utter betrayal from our representatives and police. The sheer nerve of our Chief Constable's statement after the attack about not, quote, tolerating hate would be incredible, if not so tragic. Let's not focus on the victims or preventing further attacks. The first thoughts of this man are hope, not hate. And the number one topic of discussion is how awful the attack was, followed quite closely by how this isn't fair on the ordinary Muslims. And he goes on to point out, by the way, this correspondent is a former special constable in Manchester. He goes on to focus on how amazing it is that people are scanning what ordinary folk are saying about the attack and about Islam to find any signs of racism or bigotry, at the same time being utterly unconcerned about what the magazines the killer, the murderer, had been reading and what they're saying about non-Muslims. Let's not forget, this guy actually had, literally, he was flying the flag of ISIS from his house. He just got back from Libya, where he'd evidently had some kind of training. And the whole kind of Boston strong, Manchester strong, the idea of making it into a kind of municipal healing therapy, I think actually prevents us from actually asking the question, what's going to change? What's going to change? And I'm concerned too by this. To me, there's, and I'm going to try and phrase this carefully, but I think it is borderline bad taste to have mass community mourning. I understand we live in an age in which we are supposed to flaunt our empathy, but empathy is trickier than it seems. And unless you've actually lost an 8-year-old daughter, you cannot know how that feels. It is not the city that has a big gaping hole in its heart and will have a hole in its heart until the end. It is the individuals who are the family and friends of the 22 dead in Manchester. And we talk a lot these days about cultural appropriation. There's a rather kind of unhealthy bereavement appropriation when we all pretend that we're mourning dead people who mean something to their parents, to their siblings, to their friends, but whom we did not know and whom we cannot therefore mourn. Stalin's famous line is that one death is a tragedy and 1,000,000 is a statistic. And likewise, a mother grieving her dead child is a tragedy, but 1,000,000 people presuming to grieve that dead child is a kind of grimly cheesy dinner theatre. We cannot mourn them because we did not know them. We can avenge them, and we can take steps to prevent more and more corpses being piled on a mound that is already too high. And that is what I'm concerned about. As the reaction to these events drifts into the formulaic. And they want it to be formulaic. They want you to get used to it. They want you to switch on the news and say, oh, what is it tonight? It's, oh, look, Orlando. No, wait, Boston. No, wait, Nice. No, Berlin. No, Brussels. No, Manchester. And then you adopt the supportive hashtag and you change your Twitter avatar, and after a couple of days you've forgotten until the next city gets blown up. That's the policy. That actually is the policy of the Western world. The French Prime Minister, the Mayor of London say that these events are just now part of what it means to live in a big city. Well, they didn't used to be. 20 or 30 years ago, they weren't part of what it means to be in a big city. This is not a problem that is native to Nice or to Brussels or to Manchester. It's a problem that was imported to Western cities. And those Western cities that did not import the problem, for example, Warsaw or Bucharest or Tokyo, first world cities don't have that problem. They did not import the problem. And we're told that there's also something, I think, unpleasantly coercive about the language. We're told that it's important to show, quote, solidarity, to show that we're, quote, united. These are code words for saying, get on board, get on the same page. It's candle lights, it's flowers, it's teddy bears, it's sad faces for a couple of days, but it's not questioning the decisions of the political class that led to this happening on the streets of first world cities. And as for carrying on presumes that things don't change. You see incredible changes now on the streets of Europe. I spent a lot of time this last year traveling around most parts of Western Europe. In France, it's incredible. There's soldiers everywhere. There's soldiers on the nude beaches, as I mentioned, which is ridiculous. Wearing jungle camouflage so they stand out among the nude bodies even more. Why don't they wear the desert camo? They blend in with the nudity. I don't understand it. Outside my hotel in Brussels, soldiers, armed soldiers with weapons drawn. And Britain was slightly an exception to this. If you pull up at King's Cross Station, you are greeted by armed policemen, but not yet armed soldiers. Well, now after Manchester, it's armed soldiers on the streets. This in a country where the police were not armed until they imported this problem. You know, Europe used to have like little problems with localized terrorism movements. In the United Kingdom, it was the IRA. And it imposed small inconveniences on daily life. If you had a Mars bar at Victoria Station, there was nowhere to throw away the wrapper because there were no rubbish bins in the station. Because if they put a trash can there, the IRA would put a bomb in it. So all the trash cans were taken out. And so you could have your Mars bar, but you then had to take the wrapper home with you. Small inconveniences. Now they're saying these guys will never change us, even as everything changes, even as there are soldiers on the street, even as there are armed police with automatic weapons on the street, even as they put bollards along every tiny little strip of pavement just in case some guy is minded to drive up onto the sidewalk and get a couple of grannies in the cause of going to paradise and claiming his virgins. Everything is changing. The reason why this guy was able to pull off what he did is because there's now security to get into concerts, to get into sporting events, to get in anywhere. I mean, if you go into a French shopping mall, they search your bag to make sure you've just got clothes and groceries in there. So there's more and more security lines. And these guys have figured out you don't even need to get through into the safe zone. You just wait outside the security perimeter because that's where the people are. The old line about why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Well, why do you wait outside the security perimeter, outside the safe zone? Because that's where the people are, lining up in their hundreds. And that's why, as I predicted, I'm sad to say, in a column for Maclean's in 2007, 2008, something like that, we've seen even the dumbest jihadists conclude that the easiest place to blow people up is outside the security line, as has happened at Brussels Airport, Istanbul Airport, I think it was Fort Lauderdale in Florida, and now outside the secure zone at the Ariana Grande concert. What are you going to do? No matter how far out you move the security perimeter, eventually it stops, and that's where the people line up to get in or are bottlenecked to get out, and that's where the bomber is waiting for you. And we now live in this absurd world where everything is going to have a security perimeter. Which again, didn't happen in the IRA days. In the IRA days, you could still go to pop concerts and sporting events with ease. Now everything's got to have a security perimeter. Now every little pedestrian arcade has to have these ugly bollards blocking everything off. So we can't carry on. Everything is changing. Everything is changing. And the one thing that might make a difference, such as moving the security perimeter to the national border, which would seem like an obvious place for a security perimeter, is the one thing that politicians, mainstream politicians across the Western world, will not consider. And that again brings us back to the IRA comparison. Whatever side of the Irish Troubles you fall on, they took place within a relatively stable population. You knew roughly in Northern Ireland the numbers of loyalists and the numbers of nationalists. And they didn't change much over the years. As I said, it was a relatively stable population. What's happening here is happening at a time of demographic transformation in which the principal source of so-called new Europeans also happens to be the population in which terrorism incubates. So even as Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Blair and all these other Western politicians keep assuring us that it's only a tiny, teensy, teeny, weeny percentage of Muslims that want to go full-blown Allahu Akbar on you, percentages work in a very simple way. Let's take they never actually say the percentage, so we don't know what they mean by teeny, whether it's 17%, whether it's 3%, whether it's 0.02%. But let's keep it simple. Let's just say it's 1%. That means that if you have 100,000 Muslim immigrants, you've imported a potential 1,000 terrorists. This is how percentages work. If you then import another 100,000 Muslims, you've just doubled the number of terrorists. Because as I said, that's how percentages work. And if you import, as Europe has, millions and millions and millions of Muslims, then you are importing thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are going to do what this guy did on Monday. And I will say one other thing about it. And that actually is at the heart of it. If you're importing people at a rate at which you cannot assimilate them, and in which at a rate at which, in fact, people are disassimilating so that the second and third generations are more radicalized than the first. I mean, generally speaking, a lot of first-generation Muslim immigrants in the 50s, 60s, 70s were very happy to come to the mother country and to live in a world that offered them economic opportunity. And their children and grandchildren, as in this case, it's been far more problematic. But let me bring it back again to the debt we owe the dead. As I said, we can't mourn the 8-year-old girl, and it's actually cruel and offhand to assume that we can know what that little girl's family and friends are feeling, or any of the other victims in Manchester. But if we truly cared about her, as politicians and policemen profess to care about her, then I think the debt we owe her is to make sure that it doesn't happen to any other 8-year-old girls. I went all over Europe in the last few months, from Lapland, way up Kemi in Finland, in southern Lapland. There's basically nothing between there and Santa's Grotto, all the way down to the Mediterranean, to the ports and to the islands where the great tide of migrants is arriving from Africa and the Middle East. So top to toe, I went all over Europe. And I talked to a lot of the female victims of the migrant tide, not always terrorism, but sometimes of the gang rape that has taken hold in Germany and in Scandinavia, and the grooming, the child sex slavery that is now endemic in parts of the Netherlands and in Yorkshire, to bring it back to Manchester, to towns not far away from Manchester. And I'm not a great investigative reporter, and it takes a little bit of effort to track down, say, the girls in Rotherham who were the victims of Muslim grooming gangs, who suffered terrible things, who were sex slaves, white girls who were seized as sex slaves for groups of Muslim men. The taxi driver network in Rotherham, including taxi firms that are still in existence there, colluded and cooperated in this. The social services covered it up. The police covered it up. It takes you a little bit of time to persuade some of these girls to meet with you and to talk to you. And when they do, the stories they tell you are horrific. Being doused in petrol as guys dance around you with lit matches, threatening to burn you alive, being dangled off the edge of balconies, being urinated on by groups of men. And as horrifying as all those stories are, the most horrifying thing is the heartlessness of the authorities, by which I mean not just law enforcement, but also the political class too. The story that always stays with me is of one girl. This guy, she was 12 years old. This guy was forcing her to perform a sex act on her in his car. A policeman in Rotherham, a pair of policemen drove by, wound down the window, chatted with this guy as the girl was performing the sex act on him, made small talk with him, what was going on, and then drove off into the night. And that's how I think of those girls I spoke to in Rotherham. Of all the years that the police just drove off into the night without doing a thing for them. And what I found interesting about the girls I met in Rotherham and other towns is how uninterested most people in the media are in them. I thought they'd all have been interviewed to death. I thought they'd all have their stories down pat. And actually, very few people have made any effort to actually speak to or contact these girls, these young women, the victims of appalling, abusive situations in which the police and the political class facilitated. And actually, very few people make the effort to go and interview them. The social services people, the institutions and systems that failed them, those people are giving interviews. Some of them have got OBEs, Officer of the Order of the British Empire, and other baubles of the state. But very few of the media are actually interested in tracking down and speaking to the girls themselves. And what I took away from that was the utter heartlessness of the British state when it came to the victims of those gangs in a corner of northern England. And now, in another corner of northern England, we have more dead girls and dead young women. More victims. And that's why I don't buy this whole Manchester Strong, flowers, teddy bears, policemen joining in candlelit vigils. The state is very heartless with its citizenry over this. They're sad when the little girls die, and then it's back to business as usual until the next bunch of little girls die. Something has to change. This problem was imported. And so things that once happened on the fringes of the map, a couple of days after Manchester, a bunch of Christians were killed in Cairo, just south of Cairo. And we think, oh, well, that's the Middle East, that's Egypt. Actually, Egypt, it was a kind of chaotic place, but things like that didn't even happen in Egypt. That crept in. That crept up from the crazy Mahdists in Sudan and the dervishes in Somalia, and that crept into the cities of the Middle East too, which were relatively moderate in their disposition on that. And what's to prevent it, these things that happen in Cairo and Lahore, eventually happening in Brussels and Marseille as frequently as they happen in Lahore? It's not like Northern Ireland in a stable population. It's happening at a time of fast-moving demographic transformation. And the answer to what's happened in Manchester is not solidarity, not unity. It's to question. It's to question the political class, to insist on the right to question them without being accused of being a hater or helping divide people or not being in solidarity or any of these other feeble evasions, but to insist on the right to question the political class and to demand that they give answers as to what's going to change. Not hashtags, not teddy bears, not flowers, not the umpteenth chorus of Imagine, but answers as to what they're going to do to stop the pile of dead little girls and dead women getting higher and higher. We'll see you next time.